At this time, for our first speaker, we have the great deacon Yisrayl Abelin.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Now, the title of my sermon today is, Do Not Follow the Crowd in Doing Evil. Now, if you'll all turn over in your books of Yahweh to Exodus chapter 23, which is found on page 63, Exodus 23 and verse 2. And it says, Do not follow the crowd in doing evil. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And we all know that Yahweh gives us a choice to choose between righteousness and evil. So if we follow the crowd in doing evil, then we are breaking this law. Now, the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program teaches about peer pressure, and succumbing to peer pressure has led many people into many harmful, evil, destructive situations, like doing drugs, murder, and there are many other things. So we can't let other people lead us into the way of sin, which is the breaking of Yahweh's laws. Now, if you'll turn over to Proverbs 1, and let's look at verses 10 through 16. Proverbs 1, which is found on page 496, and look at verses 10 through 16. And it says, verse 10, My son, if sinners entice you, do not agree with them. So if they entice you, no matter how hard the pressure is, do not agree with them. When they say, Come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us ambush some innocent victim without cause, with no cost to us. Let us swallow them up, alive, like the grave, and whole, like those that go down into the pit. We will take all manner of wealth. We will fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will have a common purse. Whatever we plunder, we will share and share alike. Verse 15. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet out of their path. For their feet rush into trouble as they make haste to shed blood, commit crime. Now, so it says there, do not let sinners entice you. Don't agree with them, no matter how hard the pressure is. As I said, don't agree with them. One great example of someone keeping this law of do not follow the crowd in doing evil was Daniel. Now, there are many other examples, but one is Daniel. Now, Daniel kept this law by refusing to follow the king's decree that everyone should pray to the king and not to Yahweh, which was against Yahweh's law. And Daniel did not give in. And you could find that in Daniel 6. Daniel 6, and that's on page 677. Daniel 6, and starting at verse 6, it says, Then these presidents and princes assembled together before the king, and this is what they said to him. King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to institute a firm decree that whoever requests a petition of any god, El, or man for 30 days, except of you, O king, he must be thrown into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the statute by signing this firm decree, so that it may not be changed, altered, or revoked, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Now when Daniel learned that the decree was signed, he went into his house, and in his upper room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times in a day, and prayed, and gave thanks and praise before Yahweh, just as he had done before. So that's a great example of someone who kept this law, even though persecution came after that, which is, after that he got thrown into the lion's den. But even though the persecution came, he kept praying to Yahweh 3 times a day, and he set a great example for us. Now, there are a lot of other great examples in the book of Yahweh, in the Holy Scriptures, of people who keep that law, and there are also some of those who break that law. Now, another example of someone who kept this law was David. It was an example with David, Shaul, and Jonathan. So David was a righteous man, and Shaul saw how wise he was, and Shaul was afraid of him. And he ordered Jonathan and all his attendants to kill David. But Jonathan did not follow the crowd in doing evil. And if you'll turn over to 1 Samuel 18, and we'll start with verse 14. And that's found on page 238. 1 Samuel 18, and start at verse 14. And it says, David conducted himself wisely in all his ways, and Yahweh was with him. And verse 15, when Shaul saw how very wise he was afraid of him. Now, if you'll go over to right on the next page in chapter 19, and look at verse 1. And it says, Shaul told Jonathan his son and all his attendants to kill David, but Jonathan was so deeply fond of David. Verse 2, Jonathan warned David, saying, my father Shaul is looking for an opportunity to kill you. Be on your guard until morning and stay in a secret place and hide. So that's another example of someone who kept that law. Now in the respect unit, on page 30 at the top of the page, page 30, at the top of the page it says, people who respect themselves will not be pressured into doing something that is morally wrong. So if you're being pressured into doing something that is wrong and you stand up for the right thing, then you are showing self-respect. It says, here's the bottom line. Negative conformity in the form of peer pressure can cause you to make choices that you would not make on your own. Skipping down a little, it says, a friend will encourage you to respect your mind and body by not smoking, abusing drugs and alcohol, or engaging in promiscuous behavior. So it says that a true friend will encourage you to do the right thing. A true friend will warn you of the risks of doing the wrong thing. And it takes a lot of courage to follow Yahweh and not follow the crowd. It takes a lot of courage to keep the law, or to follow Yahweh. And we need to take a stand to do what is right, despite the pressures others may place upon us to do evil. Now, those who follow the crowd in doing evil, they have no peace. As you can see in Isaiah 57, and look at verse 19. And it says, I create the fruit of the lips, peace, peace, to him that is afar off, and him that is near, and I will heal him, says Yahweh. But the wicked are like the troubled sea, which it cannot rest, whose waters wash up mire and dirt. There is no peace, says my Father, for the wicked. The wicked, they suffer from the guilt, they suffer from the curses and the consequences of their sins. And then a couple scriptures for your notes is 2 Thessalonians 3 verses 13, which talks about standing up for what is right, and Jacob 4:17. Now, to go against any of these 613 laws of Yahweh is evil, as we all know. Now, to follow anyone in doing evil, regardless of their age, their rank, the position that person may hold, is against Yahweh's laws. Now, evil or sin is defined as in the scriptures as the breaking of Yahweh's laws, as you can read in 1 Yochanan. So remember to always stand up for what is right, even if you are the only one left standing. And that's a quote from the Peaceful Solution. Stand up for what you have proven to be morally correct, even if you are the only one left standing. No matter how hard the pressure is, don't give in. And look at these great examples that you can see in the book of Yahweh and in the examples Pastor has given us. And if you'll all please stand. It's my great honor and privilege to present to you the great Kahan Benjamin Krause Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. It's a very great joy and honor and opportunity to be here today on a very special day. Really, how are you enjoying the weather? I would like to get our mind on a couple things here. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to kind of go through a timeline. But I'm going to be reading an excerpt here from the Mark of the Beast, chapter 11. It's in the 11th chapter. I'm going to be reading a little bit here. I'll try to put it up on the screen for you. It says, the pertinent part says, Yahweh was speaking of the great tribulation which starts with a strong covenant of 7 years and ends at the end of this 7 years with a great nuclear war. Okay? Now, remember, the Mark of the Beast was written in the 80s. Okay? He was probably working on it in the 70s, and it was published in the 80s. Okay? Now, this was before a 7-year covenant was even in anyone's imagination other than in Yahweh's plan and in pastor's mind, because he knows Yahweh's plan. He knows the prophecies. Okay? Now, he, as you can see, was fully expecting this 7-year covenant. Okay? Now, imagine that. We've already lived through it. We've seen the signing and all these things, but he hadn't even seen anything yet he believed without seeing. And remember, more blessed are those that believe without seeing. Now, with that in mind, let's turn over to Daniel, because this is where this prophecy comes from. Daniel chapter 9. I'll give you a page number, Daniel 9. The great future priest that spoke before me spoke of Daniel, and I know that our great pastor is looking forward to resurrecting Daniel and having long discussions with this great prophet. He's not a minor prophet. He was over 18. They just didn't check his ID. Okay, Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to be looking at verse 24 on page 681. It says, 70 weeks are determined. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holiest of the holy people. Now you can see very clearly right here that 70 weeks were determined. This is Yahweh's plan. Let's get this in our mind. Nothing is being done outside this plan. This plan has not changed. Now, he goes through here in verse 25 and 26, and he breaks these weeks down, these 70 weeks. And in verse 27, we learn about what they call the missing week of Daniel. Well, it's not missing, it's right there. Okay, and you are living in it. We've been living in it for quite a while now, and we're at the end of it. Okay, and you're going to find that out today. Now, it's kind of like the missing link. You know, I tell them that the links ain't missing. We got galaxy links here at the feast. Right? There's no missing links. I know where they're at, because I get plenty of them when I'm here. Okay, so 927, he says that he will confirm a covenant with many. And remember, that word many means rabim. It can be rabin or rabim, plural, or rabin, singular, in the Hebrew. And you can go look that up for yourself. I don't have time today. But you remember this covenant that was signed with rabin. I'm going to show you. Y'all remember this? Does everybody remember what day that was? The signing, September 13th, 1993. What's today? September 13th, what? 2014, 21 years later, right? Just a coincidence, I'm sure, that we're speaking about this today, but we'll find out about all the amazing coincidences that Yahweh has put together for this great house in these last days. And it's just amazing, simply incredible what Yahweh is doing. has been doing since the beginning. Now, of course, the signing took place on September 13th, and in the Oslo Agreement, which it was called Oslo Agreement because that's where it was put together, in Oslo, Norway. There was a lot of backroom dealing in the Vatican and other places as well with the people behind the scenes, but nonetheless, it was called the Oslo Agreement, and one of the clauses of the Oslo Agreement said it would go into effect 1 month after its signing, and it went into effect on October 13th, 1993. It was signed on September 13th at the White House. You see Yitzhak Rabin, remember, I will make a covenant with many. He will make a covenant with Rabin for 1 week. Remember that last week that Daniel spoke of. Let's go back to it again. He says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he'll cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Surely we know by now, after the first 3.5 years, that Benjamin Netanyahu put a stop to it. And then after the 7 years in 2004, we've gone over this before. If you're not sure, we go back and look in the timeline. That covenant went back into effect, okay? And then the last 3.5 years of that covenant would have ended October 2007. We're going to talk more about that in just a few minutes. Okay, so now lately, Pastor's been talking about some colors. And I want to show them to you because this ties in with everything. Believe it or not, you know, is there anything in the house of Yahweh that would be a coincidence? I want to show you the colors. Can everyone see this? I'll get it right here. Can everyone see this? Okay, now the first color on there is the red. It's actually a little lighter red, lighter shade of red. It's not the death red, the sin red. Okay, it's a little light shader, or shade lighter. Okay, then you see, let's see, what would be the next one? Gold, green, and the last one is purple. Can everyone see that? Okay. So, let's talk about those colors. Now, everybody's seen a rainbow, surely, right? Over here in the House of Yahweh, we see a lot of double rainbows, don't we? It's amazing. But a rainbow always starts with the color red, and it ends with the color purple. Now, this is no coincidence. And there's 7 colors in the rainbow. And that number 7 is very significant, as we're going to learn today. But red, in scriptures, red refers to death and sin. Okay? You know, we have blood sacrifice. We have, you know, the shedding of blood must take place. Also, red, if you remember the Hebrew word Adam means red. Okay? To be ruddy, red. Remember Judge Rosie, we went down to help her on 1/21, 2014 at the city council meeting, and that word 121 was from 119 Adam, and it meant rosy, red. If you all remember these things and keep them in your mind. Red, now this color on this rainbow here, this sash that we're going to be wearing at the feast, it's a shade lighter. Why? Well, because when we came to the house of Yahweh, we were practically dead. Okay, we were dead in our trespasses and sins, but Yahweh brought us here. We had the spirit of calling. Okay, so we barely made it to the gate, right? You were like the walking dead, barely dead. And now I want to remind you of something that Pastor, this used to be up on the wall here in the sanctuary on the men's side. And Pastor said, I see some healthy faces. I used to see some of the sickest people come here. He says, I see your health improving. He says, it will improve more, brethren. You're going to be surprised how healthy you are going to get in the next few years with these cleanses you are doing and taking this death off of you. And I'm going to show you how remarkable this is that our great pastor and overseer, this wise architect, this family builder, how he has been doing this step by step by step just as Yahweh laid out in his great plan, has not deviated from it one bit, has worked day and night to cleanse us from all these impurities. So the color red, remember Isaiah 1:18 as well, though your sins be as scarlet, remember, though they be red, they'll be white as snow. Keep these things in mind. Also for your notes on red, 1 Corinthians 15:22, where it talks about the first Adam, which led to death, and the second Adam, which was a life-giving spirit. Okay, now that color green, the green represents growth, life, like it's springtime, how everything becomes green again and new. Turn over to Isaiah chapter 44. Isaiah 44. These are familiar scriptures, but we're gonna bring them to a whole new light today. Isaiah 44:1 on page 558, it says, "Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Yisrayl, whom I've chosen. This is what Yahweh says, who made you and formed you from the womb, who will help you. Do not be afraid, Jacob, my servant, and Yeshurun, beloved Yisrael, whom I have appointed. For I will pour water upon him who's thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour out my spirit." Yachanan 6:63 for your notes. Romans 7:14. "The words that I speak to you, they are spirit, and they are life everlasting." It's the laws of Yahweh he's speaking of here. "And my blessing upon your offspring." Acts chapter 3, verse, I believe, 21 or 22, where he says, the blessing is to turn us from our iniquities. And that's what Pastor has been doing all these years, is turning us away from our pushing these laws aside. "They will spring up," verse 4, "among the grass as willows by the water courses." Now I want to show you a picture of what a willow tree looks like. These aren't in order, but here's a willow by a water course. Notice how beautiful and green it is? Okay? That's how you are becoming because of this cleansing that we've been going through all these years, that our great pastor, under inspiration of, by guidance of Yahshua and inspiration of Yahweh, has been doing for us, cleansing us with these laws as with water, as one of the apostles said. Now, the next color I want to talk about is the gold. And we know about the gold. The gold means purified, right? Remember Eob 23:10? Let's turn over there real quick. Eob 23:10, just real quickly. Eob 23:10. I'll give you a page number. It's page 424, where it reads, "But he knows the way that I take, and when he has finished trying me, I will come forth as gold." You know, in that rainbow, you have the yellow, right? Which that yellow color represents testing. That's how we become pure, through that testing, that trying. And we come out, hopefully, we come out as gold. Once all that dross is burned away, all the sin has gotten out, we come out shiny like gold. I'm talking about a gold character, okay? Because none of us could endure going through physical fire, okay? But our character is being shaped and molded, okay? Now, also for your notes on the gold, 1 Kepha 1:7, where he says, "The trying of your faith is like gold." Remember that scripture, just look it up. And also remember 2 Timothy 2:20, where he said, "In a great house, there's vessels of gold and vessels of silver." Now, he's not talking about, articles of gold, like gold pots or gold utensils. He's talking about people, okay? This is about people that he's talking about here. Vessels of gold in a great house, 2 Timothy 2:20. And remember, we just went on 777. Pastor had his gold vision. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, the last color was purple. Now, purple in Scripture represents royalty. Royalty wore the purple robes. Remember, they put a purple robe on Yahshua, and they mocked him, saying, "Hail, the King of the Yadim," or the King of the Jews, whatever it says in the King James. They mocked him, but they put the purple on him because that's a sign of royalty. Remember Mordecai in the book of Hadassah, when they wanted to honor him, they put a purple robe on him and they paraded him around. Purple has always been associated with royalty in Scripture. But now, Royalty, of course, in the house of Yahweh, that's a different thing. If you want to find, people dressed in fancy long dresses, go to the Vatican. They wear dresses there. We don't wear dresses here. We don't wear silky dresses, and I'm not talking about the women. I'm talking about the men. We don't wear dresses here. We don't wear all these fine. Actually, these are beautiful apparel right here. Okay. This is what you'll find in the house of Yahweh. You'll find the scriptural clothing here, okay? But, royalty, it's talking about being the greatest servants of all, and that unity that we all have to come to, that unity. Now, I want to remind you of something here. Okay, where'd it go? Here it is. Y'all remember this book? I brought it up here quite a few times, and I've reminded us that this 13th book of Israel, part 2, is phenomenal for so many reasons on so many levels. But it's purple. It's the first purple book in the house of Yahweh. Okay? And it's got gold lettering on it. Okay? Gold lettering, purple and gold. Now, what would be significant about that? Okay. The word purple, it's from Strong's Concordance. We're going to have it here for you in a minute. It's from Strong's Concordance, and the word, it's purple, and it means, actually, it's word number 713, okay? Word number 713. And purple, actually, I'll just tell you this for a minute. The purple dye that they used to use was so rare. It was so rare. It's like righteousness in these last days. It's just so rare, It's easy to find evil at every turn. But the purple, the way they used to try to get that purple and what they had to extract it from was very, very difficult, and it was very, very expensive. Okay, I don't have time to go into all that today, but I'm just going to tell you, it's word number 713, and we'll have that here for you in a moment. In fact, I think we might have it now. I really don't want to leave you without the evidence. There you go. 713, Hebrew word 713 means purple. Purple. Now, does anybody remember the first sermon in this book? Let's look what the date was. 7/6/13. 7/13. 7/13. Now, that would have took some great planning on pastor's part to have been born all those thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago when Strong's wrote his concordance. And hey, make sure you make 713 purple, huh? Right? Make sure that it's purple. Now, let me show you the significance of this. Right now, we're in the purple stage. And I was wondering, that 7613, you remember all the work we did on that, okay? I want to remind you of the definition of 7613 in Strong's. An elevation, an exaltation in rank or character. Now I'm going to prove to you that on 7/6/13, we were exalted from the gold stage to the purple stage. Okay? Now, how does this all tie in with Daniel and the 21 years? Well, let me lead you up. Let's start in 1993. September 13th, 1993, there was a peace agreement signed. 21 years ago today, exactly. Okay? 7 years later, the house of Yahweh was growing. They were going through their growth. What occurred in 2000, 7 years later? We began confessing our sins. The internal cleansing, okay? The internal cleansing's really not just the confessions, but the internal cleanses. And then the ashes of the red heifer. Y'all remember this, right? Y'all remember why these things were taking place, but what you don't know is why they were going in the order that they were going. These weren't just done willy-nilly. Pastor didn't just wake up one morning and go, you know what, I'm going to practice that red heifer law. Let me go do that. Let me go find one of those. It wasn't like that. He knew exactly what he's doing. He's doing this. He is a purifier of the sons of Levi. That's what it says. He sits as a refiner and a purifier of us. Okay, now, he says, so 2000 to 2007, we went through our cleansing, which we're still going through. 2007, what occurred? Well, the global warming. Remember, June of 2007, the bowl was poured out in Revelation 16. You remember that seventh bowl poured out about the global warming. The next month, in July, on 7/7/7, Pastor had a gold flake vision. Y'all remember that, right? We haven't forgotten these things, right? We haven't forgotten the 7-year covenant, have we? We all have this in our mind, right? So 7/7/7, Pastor had a gold flake vision. Remember? Exactly on 7/6/13, let me tell you what took place. 7/6/13 was the very end of the 6-year cycle. 7/7/13 would have gone into the 7th year. Everyone understand that? From 7/7/07 to 7/6/13 was exactly 6 years. On 7/7/13 would have been the beginning of the 7th year, right? See, these numbers, I know we're looking at them, and none of us, I didn't even make sense of it until the inspiration of Yahweh came. Just this week, actually. I didn't know what that, I only knew what the numbers meant. They matched the van down there on, remember the license plate, 7613, and it has character education written all over it. So I thought, oh, exaltation of character. Yeah, we promote character. We promote the peaceful solution. But no, there's more to it. 7/6/13 ended that 6th year going into the 7th year. Remember that number 7. It's so important. As a matter of fact, the number 7 is the number of spiritual perfection, Yahweh's seal or covenant number. Look in the book of Revelation alone, and how many times do you hear 7 lamps, 7 seals, all the 7s all throughout this thing. Okay, and also that number 21, right, 3 7s, is the ultimate of spiritual perfection. The ultimate of spiritual perfection. Now, so 7/6/13 came, and then a year later, to the very date, y'all remember, because I brought a sermon on this, and I showed you these pictures. I'm going to show them to you again. On 7/6/14 of this year, right there, DEATH, it says death. This was right out here over the feast grounds. Okay, and many witnesses saw it. I wasn't the only one that saw it. The future priest saw it, and other priests were there and saw it in the sky. Clear as day. And remember, notice the date on the top. I'm horrible with this. I need some work. I'm going to have these future priests help me later. Maybe get some training. There we go. 7/6/14, it says at the top. Okay, so, and here it is. We have it outlined for you so you can see it a little better in the color of death, which is red. Now, the interesting thing was, as this thing sat there, a line began to form through the word death. I know you probably can't see that real well. A line went through the word death. Now, this was on 7/6/14. Well, what would be the significance of that? Well, we didn't know at the time, but that was the end of the 7 years of Pastor's 7/7/7 gold flake vision. Okay, that was the end day of it. The next day would have been, it was exactly 7 years. Okay, now why is the line through death? Well, that's interesting, right? We're going to find out more. So, in 93 to 2000, we have 7 years. From 2000 to 2007, you have your second 7 years. And then from 2007 to 2014, you have your third 7-year period. I'm wondering why the sanctuary is not exploding right now, because let me just tell you, turn over to Ephesians 4 right now real quick. Ephesians 4. So I want to show you something about Pastor. Ephesians 4. I don't mean exploding for me, but I mean for Yahweh. I mean, it's amazing what Yahweh's done here. And we're right at the end of this plan. And I know Pastor is going to be elaborating on this. So, Ephesians 4, page 918, verse 11. And he gave some to be popes, and some to be cardinals. Is that what he said? You know, when I was getting my tire changed a couple weeks ago, I go through a lot of tires. There was a Spanish guy changing my tire, very lowly sort, just got out of prison, tattoos all over him. And he pointed this scripture out to me and told me, notice there's no word pope in there. I don't know why he thought I needed to know that, but I thought that was remarkable, that came from the mouth of someone that's not even in the house of Yahweh, and he knew the word pope is not in there anywhere. He says, and he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some preachers of the message of the kingdom, and some pastors and teachers. Notice, for the perfecting of the saints. For the perfecting of the saints. What do you think pastor's been given to us for? To bring us to this perfection. Remember, Malachi 3:3, he sits as a purifier. That's his job. He's making us pure, but he's not waving a magic wand, and he's not, this has been a process of 21 years since the signing of that peace agreement. I'm not saying the establishment of the house of Yahweh doesn't matter. Pastor showed you that this last time period, this last 7 years, began with Daniel, with the signing of that peace treaty 21 years ago today. Do you see how close we are? Do you see how close we are? How are we purified? Turn over to Revelation 14:12. I'm just about done. Revelation 14:12. Just got couple more minutes to go. I don't want to leave something out here. Revelation 14:12, and believe me, there's so much in here that this is a million sermons and all this that Yahweh's showing us here. But Revelation 14:12 on page 980 says, in this manner are the saints purified. Now, get out of your mind that the saints are Catholic popes. Take the S off it, and that's what you get. They ain't. They ain't a saint. Okay? Take that S off. The only saints that are in this earth right now are sitting right here in the sanctuary and all the outlying areas that are watching this program right now and supporting the house of Yahweh. In this manner are the saints purified, by keeping the laws of Yahweh. That's why you know they're not saints. They're not keeping these laws. Who in the world is keeping these laws? All 613 of these righteous laws that Yahweh gave us. Who out there? Bring forth your witnesses. They're not there. They're here. They've been here. In the top nation of the chief of the nations. I remember there was a song tape CD one time. 21 years in the top nation of all nations. 21 years. I want to show you. I told you today's September 13th, 1993. The 3 sevens are over as far as, they're not over yet. We still have another moon. Let me show you something. Remember the first sermon given on 7/6/13. Notice the name of the sermon on 7/6/13 at the beginning of this purple stage, when we went into the purple stage. Remember, we even got purple books of Yahweh. Purple books of Yahweh. Now, these were ordered back at Passover. Purple books of Yahweh even. I got mine. Did you get yours? Well, get it on order, because they're going to be really, really hot commodity here really soon. Now, no, they're already hot. Chapter 1, Peace in 30 days. 30 days from today will be October 13th, 2014. We will be at the end of that 21 years, those 3 sevens, that mark of spiritual perfection. Can we obtain peace in 30 days? Brothers and sisters, can we do it? Can we come into unity with Yahweh? We've got to do it. We've got to cleanse. We've got to cleanse our hearts. We've got to cleanse our hands, our minds. We've got to do it. We can do it. Yahweh, this was all set up by Yahweh. Yahweh knows you can do it. It's His righteous pleasure to give us the kingdom. But we've got to follow the overseer. That's a law of Yahweh. We've got to follow what our overseer tells us. We've got to do what he says. If we don't, we're going to be lacking. And pastor doesn't want to lose anybody. Not one person. Look what Yahweh has gone through. Look what he has gone through. Look at this plan that he put together. Look at the mercy of Yahweh here. Were we ready 14 years ago? 7 years ago? But you know what? Look at you today. Pastor said when we first came here, we looked like death warmed over. Now he says, I look out amongst you and I see the healthiest faces on the face of the earth. The healthiest faces. Well, why? Because you've been cleansing, and you've been purified by the greatest purifier that has been given to us as a gift in these last days. Brothers and sisters, please, 30 days. Let's have peace. The feast is coming. Get excited. You know, you are at the tail end. Praise Yahweh, and I hope Yahweh's greatly blessed your understanding. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to the great Kohan Ilya Hawkins.
You may all be seated. Looking around in the world today about what is taking place without these laws of peace that we're actually receiving here in Yahweh's house. Of course, the first article is speaking of this respiratory disease that's going around throughout the United States, and it's taking hold of the children. And remember, children are supposed to be a prized possession, and teachers, trained to be teachers, but we see children going into intensive care with respiratory infections rather rapidly, and no one can explain why. They're wondering why. And then we also have the Ebola virus, which the World Health Organization is now saying is out of hand. Now, keep in mind that Ebola, it can take you up to 21 days to realize you have it, but then you're supposed to remember everyone you came into contact with in that time frame. And just imagine if you lived in a city of 21 million people. That's what we have right now. And imagine, try to think who you came in contact with in the last 21 days. And then imagine being in a city of 21 million people. And keep in mind what Malachi Martin has brought from the beginning. Do not forget that. Then we're just over a year down the road, and of course now we're back to the United States once again looking to bomb Syria. Iraq, they're saying Iraq has asked for our help, so we have to help them by bombing Syria. Now remember, Russia was the one that stood up for Syria last time, but now we're back, and Russia is being put under heavy sanctions, and they've tried to remove them from the picture. And we also see the UN now going to Syria to talk to Syria. Also, keep in mind when you watch all of these things, all of these beheadings that you're supposedly seeing that's done by supposed people, remember what the Catholic Church has taught from the beginning. They want their enemy to be your enemy. They teach differently. They don't want you to stop and think before you proceed. They want you to act now. So keep this in mind when you watch this, and do not forget what Pastor has brought us and even what Malachi Martin said as they're trying to eradicate a religion. So at this time, if we could play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. We're going to start off our broadcast today with a respiratory virus that has been spreading rapidly over the past few months, causing hundreds of children to be hospitalized. This particular virus is called enterovirus D68 and has been reported mostly in the Midwest and southeast parts of the United States. Now, there are dozens and dozens of enteroviruses, but there's something about D68 that makes it worse. This particular enterovirus has much more severe symptoms, often landing people in the hospital. Now, at Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, Missouri, more than 400 children were hospitalized with signs of this virus, with 60 of those children ending up in intensive care. And here's the important part, all in less than a month. Well, pediatricians at Mercy Hospital say they've never seen anything like it and don't know why it's gotten so bad this year. Enterovirus is spread person to person, and the recent start of school in mid-August was the same time these cases of D68 started. Now, this respiratory virus has the potential to cause anyone to be sick, but a child with asthma or a history of asthma is much more at risk. Well, from one scary virus to the next, the West African Ebola virus is spiraling out of control, but health officials say they know how to stop it. So why isn't the Ebola virus being contained? Well, for every Ebola patient, healthcare workers are supposed to keep track of every single person who's had close contact with them. If one of those contacts gets sick, they're supposed to be isolated. Then all of their contacts are followed until there are no more sick patients. So what's the problem? Well, in many parts of West Africa, contact tracing is not working. Parts of West Africa have streets with no names. People have no addresses, meaning that some contacts are never found. And just one missed contact can spread Ebola to other contacts, which will also be missed. Now, the CDC reports that even one missed contact can keep the outbreak going. All of this is beginning to add up and has the World Health Organization really concerned. Well, for the past few months, we've been following the moves of ISIS, or the Islamic State of Iraq. And at the end of this broadcast, we'll talk about how this group got started. But this week, Vice President Joe Biden had some very strong words for ISIS. Let's take a look.
As a nation, we're united. And when people harm Americans, we don't retreat. We don't forget. We take care of those who are grieving. And when that's finished, they should know we will follow them to the gates of hell until they are brought to justice. Because hell is where they will reside. Hell is where they will reside.
President Obama and America's closest military allies held crucial talks this week. The NATO leaders are considering forming a joint plan to fight the terror group ISIS and are discussing a response to Russia's aggressive moves in eastern Ukraine. The formal NATO agenda is all about closing the war in Afghanistan and boosting defense budgets for NATO member nations. Now, President Obama has been meeting with Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko and the leaders from Great Britain, Germany, France, and Italy. Now, these talks were to focus entirely on the Ukraine issue. However, President Obama will use the opportunity to lobby European leaders for more help against ISIS. President Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron, writing in the Times of London, said neither nation would be cowed by the brutality of Islamic State forces, also known as ISIL. Now, they urged other NATO nations to join the fight. They continued, when the threats of our security increasingly emanate from outside NATO's borders, we must build more partnerships with others who share our values and want a tolerant and peaceful world, the leaders wrote. Now, they continued, that includes supporting the partners who are taking the fight to ISIL on the ground, as we have done by stepping up support for Kurdish and Iraqi security forces. Now, in addition to meetings with the European leaders, President Obama will also have a meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan, a key ally, a key U.S. ally in the Middle East, now also threatened by ISIS. Well, despite the talks, American officials believe they're free to use airstrikes against ISIS. However, not everyone in the global community is of the same opinion. Now, YPN's Larry McGee has a report on the other side of the story. Larry, who are some of the players disagreeing with America's position?
As one of the key players among the evil powers which the papacy says is forming, Russia, Jeff, is one of the biggest opponents of America's intentions at this time. In a report recently released by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russian officials stated that the U.S. strikes against Islamic State in Syria without a UN mandate would constitute an act of aggression and a violation of international law. According to the Russian position, the attacks would further inflame the conflict in the Middle East. And there is also concern that with the classic oops excuse, the prolonged strikes might be further utilized to target Syrian government forces as well. Moscow maintains that any strikes within Syria should be approved by Syrians.
Now, Larry, Moscow is aligned with China, but what has the Syrian response been to all of this, and what has America's reply been?
Syrian officials say any attack within their borders will be considered an act of aggression. But America's position, voiced by Secretary of State John Kerry from Saudi Arabia this week, is the government of Iraq has invited the United States of America and asked for help from the U.S. as well as several of its neighbors. And according to international law, when a country is invaded and invites someone in to help, then a country has every right in the world to respond to that request. The problem is that America was invited by the Iraqis and not the Syrians, where America also intends to strike. While the position of the war hawks and the American government seems to be settled, the opinion of the American citizens seems to be divided. Some believe we should confront terrorists wherever they are, but tired of the chaos and fighting, there is another voice growing among Americans which is saying no to war and feels we shouldn't be dropping bombs on any nation, period. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Jeff, back to you.
We appreciate your report, Larry. Well, on the topic of Syria, the new United Nations envoy to Syria recently paid them a visit with hopes to end the crisis that has claimed around 200,000 lives since 2011. The UN officials met with the Syrian president, along with other Syrian officials and the internal opposition, in a bid to restore the stalled political process that has seen little change over the past year. Iran's ambassador to Syria said, "We continue to support the work of the United Nations to reach a political solution." Now, as this visit was taking place, the attention of the people shifted from the visit to the attacks on ISIL in Syria that President Obama promised in his recent speech. Well, Mohammed Ahmed, political commentator, said Western and Arab aid to the Syrian insurgents helped ISIL grow and become stronger, and now they say they want to fight it without cooperating with the Syrian government, nor with the Iranians or Russians. And I find that hard to accomplish. Eventually, they will re-enter the Middle East under this pretext. Now, the Syrian Foreign Minister, Walid Muallim, has warned that any airstrikes on Syrian territory by the U.S. without Damascus' consent would be considered an act of aggression. Well, lastly for today, we're going to talk about the group ISIS, or ISIL, or Islamic State, or whatever this newly terrifying terrorist faction is called. Now, since we first heard of ISIS, small news outlets have been claiming that the U.S. made them. Others, besides conspiracy theorists like the Washington Post, have also arrived at the conclusion that the U.S. both trained and armed ISIS. Now, in the article, the Post outlines just exactly how this was done. For decades now, the U.S. has been acting on the old premise, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the U.S. arms and funds groups in the Middle East, hoping those groups will be able to beat other groups and thus defeat a mutual enemy. However, with years of intervention and short-term alliances by the whole world, not just the U.S., knowing who thine enemy is next to impossible. Now, the article lays out very clearly just a few of the ways the U.S. is responsible for ISIS. It starts by pointing out how the U.S. trained Syrian rebels, a fact substantiated over the last few months by The Guardian, Reuters, and a million others. Now, one high-level security commander of ISIS who spoke with the Post said that all those U.S.-trained Syrian rebels have now joined ISIS. And as far as the U.S. arming ISIS, well, the article explains that when the Iraqi army flees from ISIS, they leave all that military equipment and weaponry that the U.S. gave them behind. Thus, ISIS's arsenal continues to grow. Now, the U.S. has dumped billions of dollars in weapons, training, and supplies into the Middle East that ISIS now has so much money in weaponry, it rivals Israel for being the most capable military power in the region. So you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to know that at least some of the U.S.'s massive training and funding in the Middle East has gone directly to ISIS. No matter what you call this latest terrorist group, they were primarily made in the USA. Well, while the world watches life-threatening disease epidemics and ongoing warfare steadily increase in the Middle East, there is still a message of hope being taught. Only one place is showing a way to bring health back to mankind and how to stop all wars. The House of Yahweh is that place, and Yisrayl Hawkins is the last day's witness teaching at that place. Contact the House of Yahweh today and request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how. To contact them, you can write the House of Yahweh at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is Yisrayl Hawkins teaching the only true way to salvation. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman. Thanks for watching.
At this time, if everyone would please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Oh, what a beautiful crowd. Hey, hey. You may be seated. Thank you. Yahweh bless you, and praise Yahweh for all that praise you're giving Him. And in the shortness of this world, I've got so much stuff I don't know where to start to cover it. I guess I'll just leave it and go on talking. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to have the great Kohan Benjamin Krause Hawkins bring that sermon again during the feast, but I think you should. I know many of you didn't get it, all those numbers and things. You really need to get them registered in your mind, like page numbers, and see how Yahweh has laced this thing together. It's really beautiful. Praise Yahweh. I brought this. I don't want to wear it till everyone can. But the rainbow that I saw that day from the homestead, it was like this. I was sitting at the homestead, but I was looking at towards the sanctuary, and I saw this. It wasn't a rainbow; it's just a straight line of these four colors, and it was. I called Rotosky, the great deacon Sophania Rotosky. He and his wife ran out and took pictures of it, and I didn't know my face was above it, but it was just like this. The face was here. The colors ended right here at my left shoulder. There you go. Now, since then, of course, that we saw the double rainbow with the same colors. That pinkish red, the only thing I can think of that might resemble is, the blood in a person's body who's eating pork and our pork products. We were taken from that to the gold, and which started us to growing, and then of course we're going to the purple now, which means royal kingdom. It's so beautiful what Yahweh has laid out here for us. that purple is actually royal, and it stands for the royal kingdom of Yahweh, the kingdom of priests. That's what He's making of you and putting the finishing touches on you. So, you know, you don't have long to go now. You're going to be a part of that kingdom that receives the authority. I don't have time to bring it, but, you know, I'll bring what I can. What we're seeing here is the wars build up. The Pope says world's many conflicts. The world's many conflicts. Now, I know most people don't even watch the news, so they don't know what he's talking about. But I told you last week we have 41, I think it's 42 wars raging now in the world. 42 wars raging in the world. The war-raging nations. Remember Isaiah 66? I'm going to take those who escape of you. Isaiah 66, y'all remember that? Verse 17 through 24. He says, I will take those who escape, that is, those who come out from among them, as Revelations 18 says. It's the same, it's just worded differently. But I will take those who escape among you. And then verse 24, I believe it is, says, or verse 21 says, and I will make you priest. and put you over the war-raging nations. I got to stop that. Come on, cut it out. Put you over the war-raging nations. Well, that's the kingdom of priests that he had the great Moshe write about. The kingdom of priests. Do these things, and I'll make of you a kingdom of priests. Well, of course, you know he didn't do it yet. Yeshua is the first one to inherit this first position in this kingdom of priests. Now, who's the next that's going to inherit this position in the kingdom of priests? You. The last are going to be first into that kingdom of priests. That's it. You can depend on that. You see what a future you have for you there? Oh, man, it's amazing. But the Pope says, world's many conflicts amount to piecemeal World War III. World War III. And of course he goes on with his propaganda here, making out like he's calling for peace, when, you know, what he wants, what he would call peace right now is all these nations lay down their arms and accept the Pope and their religion, which they don't want to do. They don't want to include sodomy, fornication, bestiality, adultery into their lives. But he's wanting them to include the worship of these gods, plus Bloody Mary, the god of war that we see pictured in Isaiah 14, who is bringing all nations to death, to destruction. And that's what Yahweh shows her hopes will be right there in Isaiah 14. It's plain. And that's her goal. And of course, before any of these wars started, if you remember, I told you about Malachi Martin's book where he was predicting this. And so I listened to his interviews. I got everything I could on what he was saying because he was a Catholic writer. And he was telling the Pope's plans. That is the Vatican's plans, not the Pope's plans. The Pope is a showboat. He's a Santa Claus. He's a radio clown, that stands out in front of the Vatican, who's making all the decisions and saying these decisions are already made. Well, of course, we have that in writing. Russia fires nuclear missile hits target at 3,500 miles away. A target, a tiny target at 3,500 miles away. Now, the missile will go 5,000 miles. That would reach the United States from just about anywhere in the world. Pope talks airstrikes in Iraq, his health, possible U.S. visit, I'm sure. He pretends that he didn't endorse the military strikes, which is a lie. It's a lie. He did endorse them. In fact, I have on the very next page here from the tablet International Catholic News Weekly now. And here's what it says. You know that recently the U.S. forces have started bombing the terrorists in Iraq. Now, what they call terrorists is a different religion who's saying, no, we don't want your religion. We don't want the Catholic religion. We don't want our women defiled like the Western states are defiling their people. And they don't want it in the men's lives either. So they protect their women. And of course, the Pope says that Mary is going to make war. If you remember his very words, say, Mary is going to make war against these nations. And he named the nations. Russia and China were two of those nations that won't accept the Pope's religion. And China said to the Pope this week, keep your nose out of our religion. Don't try to mess with our religion. Russia said, don't mess with Russia. They're using this Texas words, you know, the Texas boastful slangs. Don't mess with Texas. Don't clutter Texas. Okay, you know that recently this is the news interviewers. You know, I've been pushing interviews lately. Remember that? We're pushing interviews. We're training the people to do interviews. That's what missionary work is about, to do interviews. Now, the adults need to pay attention to this too. So the classes where you train to do interviews. Tanya told me a few years ago my first words to her. She's an old-time member of the House and fully involved in the work. And she said she came home. I had got off work from a job and came home, and I had a uniform on, and I had my head stuck under the kitchen sink because I did most of my repair work at that time on 107 rent houses. Well, that's what the House of Yahweh was built with, was that labor and the rent that came in from it. But anyway, she came in and the children with her, and she said they stood there watching me, you know, with my head stuck. Here's a police officer in uniform with his head stuck under. I didn't have time to go home and change it. And she waited till I crawled out from under the sink, and she said my very first words was to her, have you ever heard the name Yahweh? Well, that was the beginning of an interview, of course. And from that, the whole family came, helped build the first mobile sanctuary, used to help come put the very first prophetic words together, walking around the table, collating those prophetic words. Started real small. Well, like the big oak tree, you know, it's reaching out all over the world now, as Yahweh said we would. Anyway, that's interviewing, and these lessons will teach you how, if you'll just get involved and pay attention, but pay attention to everything. If you watch the news, watch their facial expressions. Now, of course, this is what we're trying to get over to the children. The one that's asking the questions, that person that's asking the questions has got to be interested in the person's answer. So you got to show interest, of course. And so really pay attention. Don't just go in there and sit and go to sleep. Watch their body language. If you're sitting there, with your feet shuffling back and forth, man, what do I do now? Putting their hands in your pockets and then pulling them out of your pockets and whatever, that's the wrong thing to do, of course. You've got to be standing at attention, and you've got to act like you're interested in these people, caring for these people. I really like you. I'd like to see you in services. And we have a great time there. Come and we'll show you a joyous time from Yahweh. I've written a letter this week. It was published this week. I don't know, maybe I have that and could get it right quickly. But 2 of them, in fact. We're running 2 at a time now, 2 newsletters a week, because I'm getting... the papers are getting behind. The newspapers are. Anyway, September the 12th, this was put out. Israel Hawkins extends open invitation to keep biblical feast days at the House of Yahweh. Now, of course, that letter, that news release explains how that this is not just any feast. This is a feast that the Catholic Church said don't keep and stopped the world from keeping it with force, of course. And but it's being kept now, again, at Yahweh's established house, and I give the scriptures why. Well, I didn't think this would go that great, but over 47,000 newspapers already had it this morning running it. Yes. Plus, people who have websites have referrals to this on their website. So this is going out, that Yahweh's feast days are coming back, and big time, and it's being run by big news medias, KX News in Bismarck, ABC News, Fox News, NBC News, all the stations, all the big news stations grabbed it up quickly. This 47,000 will probably reach near 100,000 news medias before the week is out, before it'll slow down and stop. The one for non-profit holds. Oh, this one too ran this week. One-day event displaying children teachers. If you notice, the Christianity is really trying to copy the House of Yahweh now. They're training children and putting them on the news media, of course. They'll be playing Santa Claus next. It ruins the whole thing, but anyway, they've copying the house. They can't seem to come up with anything on their own, so they're copying everything we do. Well, the nonprofit holds a one-day event displaying children teachers, and this is September the 12th, 2014. That is up to 47,000. Also, it's a little less than the other, but it's getting up there. Well, of course, that's what we're doing while the Pope is declaring war, and he says he didn't do this. He declined to endorse. He said he declined to endorse the U.S. military airstrike. But that's not true. And here's the answer right here in their own newspapers. You know that recently the U.S. forces have started bombing the terrorists in Iraq to prevent a genocide, to protect minorities. Now, this is what they say. To protect minorities. No, it's to kill off. Just like the Crusades. Just like the Crusades that went out killing every form of holiness. You remember that scripture? I think the King James, and we did too, we fell for that trick, attacking the holy people. But that's not what the scripture says. It says to attack all forms of holiness. All forms. And that's what they're doing. These people that they're killing is not the house of Yahweh. but they do have forms of holiness. And if you protect your women, that's a form of holiness. If you say don't eat pork in defense of your health, in defense of dying you will die, and you turn from pork, then that's a form of holiness, and they don't want you alive. Well, of course, this is Satan's doing, getting you lined up for this great war that she hopes will destroy the heavens and the earth that govern mankind. Well, minorities, including Catholics, they say, who are under your guidance, Christians, all Christians and everybody under your guidance, it says, my question is this: do you approve the American bombing? So here's the answer. In their own paper now, and this was published August 19th, last month, the 19th of last month. Here's the answer. Thanks for such a dear question. In these cases where there is an unjust aggression, I can only say this: it is legitimate to stop the unjust aggressor. I underline the verb stop. I do not say bomb, making war. I say stop by some means. Well, of course, some means. And of course, now he says we are in World War III. So it's gone in 1 month from stopping to World War III. We are in the midst of a third world war, says Pope. And I say, praise Yahweh, bring it on. Let's see, Pope says world's many conflicts amount to a piecemeal World War III. Last month, the Pope, who has often condemned the concept of war in God's name, said it would be legitimate for the international community to use force to stop this unjust aggression by the Islamic State militants and those others like Iraq, thousands of Iraqi people, Syria, and so forth. Well, they're out to wipe them out. That's what Satan is out to do. That's the reason she started in the beginning saying to Adam and Eve, saying to Eve, has Yahweh told you this? Well, don't do this. Be like the gods. Be evil like the gods. And which Cain was, and said all the world has gone after the way of Cain. Pope says, many articles saying the same thing. Pope says world's many conflicts amount to World War III. Let's see, I believe I'll skip on through this right here quickly. Pope says global conflicts. Now, this is global conflicts, and it's all over the world now. And it goes really deep because it gets into hurt not the oil and the wine. The petrodollar is just exactly that. And then here's the White House now, the Pentagon. Curry says, in the same way that the United States is at war with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, the United States is at war with the ISIS, Ernest said. Kirby said that this is not the Iraq war from a decade ago. It's been that long, a decade ago. But make no mistake, we know we are at war with ISIS in the same way we are at war with and continue to be at war with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. Curry comments though stirred confusion on Capitol Hill, coming a day after President Obama's announced plans to expand airstrikes in Iraq and authorize them in Syria while dispatching hundreds more U.S. military personnel. Obama called for a coalition of nations to ultimately destroy now. Now, this is what Malachi Martin, if you remember, said before any of this ever started, to actually destroy now. If you remember, that's what the Crusades were about too, to try to destroy all forms of holiness. Well, they're trying to wipe out all of these people now that object to the worship of Mary, and that's what he called it. Mary is going to make war against all of those who will not accept her. Accept her, meaning accept the Catholic Church and its religion. That's ones that's bringing forth the gods. Catholic, universal, which means they worship all gods. Islamic State has as many as 31,500 fighters, they said, across Iraq and Syria. That's close to the estimated size of the Taliban force of 2001. Well, that's only part of it, too. They're not just out to stop these fighters. They're out to get rid of all forms of holiness, no matter what. Destroying ISIS may take years, they say. May take years. Well, if you're talking about stopping the army, are you talking about going in and searching out, like the Crusades did before, and finding those who practice righteousness of some kind? Now that I could see would take years. Stopping this army would not take that long, and they know it, but stopping this worship is what they're talking about. The worship that actually teaches some forms of righteousness. Sweeping new U.S. and EU sanctions target Russia's banks and oil companies. Russia, if you remember, you got to hurt not the oil and the wine, but so you're going here from this all forms of holiness to protecting the petrodollar, which Russia says she's mounting up other nations now to join her in creating their own money and their own banking system so they can resist the petrodollar. And China is one that's joined her already in this, but several other nations, from what I understand, there's about 7 nations that's joined her in this same thing. So the sanctions that they're bringing against now, Russia, it's not working. And of course, they're not going to let this stop. They're pretty desperate in what they're doing. Russia seems like at this time, and this may bring the war, she's pretty determined to go ahead with this, her and the other nations, because they don't want to give their money to the United States. They don't want the United States and their so-called democracy to take over these other states. I'm not for either side. I'm only for Yahweh, and I'm telling you what Yahweh says. In this same time period, same week of news now, we get Arizona court must recognize same-sex marriages. This is going on here in the state. Who are they bringing forth with this? They're bringing forth the Catholic Church. And the court says you can't hold back these anymore. What you're doing is unconstitutional, they say. So you got to recognize the same-sex marriages. You've got to recognize sodomy, teach it as a religion in your schools. That's what is being done now. From Hollywood, it comes forth the same way. Now, what makes you different? What makes you different from this world at this time? Of course, what I want you to do is go over to 1 Corinthians and remember this article now that we just published today. I think it's getting a lot of attention. Whether they'll get a lot of action or not is up to Yahweh. But if you'll turn over to 1 Corinthians, you'll see the difference. And this is what the Catholic Church hated. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes tried to wipe out the feast days before they ever destroyed the temple, but they saw they couldn't do it because the law was being read in that temple. That was part of the temple services. It was a law that it had to be. So the feast days, the Sabbath days were read, and of course Yeshua, he's the one that kept the Sabbath day according to commandment. He taught it. Hold your place there that in 1 Corinthians. You've got to get this in your mind. Go over to Hebrews 4. Just hold your place in 1 Corinthians if you have it. And go to Hebrews 4. This is actually Yeshua Messiah that it's speaking of here. They thought it was Joshua. But it wasn't Joshua, as I showed you. And then I was so pleased with our young priests because I told them, find me who was Joshua's high priest. And they did. They searched it out, found it. Many of the Kohanas did too. I didn't even have to tell you. And this makes me feel glad that you can go through these scriptures and see what Yahweh actually teaches. But here in Hebrews 4, verse 4, for he spoke in a certain place of the seventh day, and Yahweh rested the seventh day from all his works. And in this place, again, if any would enter into his rest, since therefore it remains that some must enter, as the number is not complete that Yahweh wants for his kingdom, so some must enter it, and those whom it was first preached did not enter because of disobedience. Again, he designated a certain day, saying, in David, today, after so long a time, as it has been said, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Now, verse 8, look who's teaching this. Now, Yeshua, this is Yeshua, our high priest, not Joshua, son of Nun. This is Yeshua, our high priest. Yeshua caused them to rest in obedience to what? Notice the law, not traditions. Remember, they got on to Yeshua about his disciples not doing certain things on the Sabbath day and breaking the tradition of the elders. That's the only thing they could accuse him of. But Yeshua taught the Sabbath according to the law, spoken of by Yahweh in a previous day. You see that? You see the difference? This was Yeshua himself, who is now our high priest, teaching this. Now, if you go back to 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 8, here we see the apostle here inviting the people and saying, therefore, let us keep the feast. Not with old leavening, not with not bringing your sins, but learning to get rid of your sins. Neither with the leaven of malice, that's anger, and with wickedness, don't bring any of that to this feast, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Truth, that meaning according to the laws of Yahweh. Now, with those two things in mind, look over to Colossians. Let us keep the feast, and remember, 47,000 newspapers already running this feast. That's going to make somebody angry. Somebody. Now look at chapter 2 of Colossians now. Therefore, let no man condemn you for doing these things, eating and drinking, in the observance of the feast days. In the observance of these feast days. These are the feasts that Yahweh said to keep Satan said, no, be like the gods and don't keep the feast, but do evil instead. Don't keep the feast. Well, Yahweh is saying to his servants, keep the feast. Therefore, let no man condemn you for doing these things, that is, eating and drinking in the observance of the feast, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days. Of the new moon or of the Sabbath days. Hold your place right there and turn over to Isaiah now, Isaiah 66. Of the new moon or the Sabbath days. Don't let anyone condemn you for this and get you to going the other way. Isaiah 66, found on page 572. Hold your place now where you were. We're going to come back there. Isaiah 66, verse 17. They who sanctify themselves, purify themselves in the gardens, following after the priest in the midst of those who eat swine's flesh, that which is offered to gods, that's part of the evil of the gods, and the rodent, which is also part of the food they're eating. I had pictures, but I'll show them to you next week. I'm out of time. Will be consumed together, says Yahweh. They're going to be consumed together. Look at verse 18. For I know their works and their thoughts. It will come that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they will come and see my glory. Well, of course, that's what we've been doing now, and gathering the nations and the tongues, and they will come. They will come over to you, Yahweh said. Now, he says, look at what else he said. I will set a sign among them, a sign among them. If you hold your place there, hold your place in Colossians, hold your place there, and turn over to Exodus 13. Exodus 13. Can you boys do that? Exodus 13. You notice he said, I'm going to set a sign among you. A sign among the nations. Exodus 13. And look at verse 9. Exodus 13 and verse 9. You got it? Exodus 13 verse 9. Read it. And it shall be as a sign to you upon your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that Yahweh's law shall be in your mouth. If you remember what is said in Malachi now, you're to seek the law at the mouth of the priest. Remember that? So it's going to be the law in your mouth that they're going to be seeking when they come here. You are that sign. The law shall be in your mouth, for with a strong hand Yahweh has brought you out of Egypt. Out of the God worship. Now, if you will go back to, hold your place a little further there than those two places. Now you got Colossians and you got Isaiah 66, and turn over to 1 Yochanan. 1 Yochanan 3. 1 Yochanan 3, and look at verse 7. We got this sign now. This sign, what is this sign? Little children, let no man deceive you. Oh, I'm sorry, you got it? It's found on page 965. Page 965. You're supposed to be holding your fingers in those other places. It's easy. You just got to learn to do it. Little children, you get reading with me? 1 John 3, verse 7. Little children, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness. Did you get that? He didn't say you who are perfect, but you who practice righteousness. You see it? If you practice righteousness, that's what he recognizes and is recognizing with this color right here of purple right now. That you are here practicing righteousness. He's recognizing that right now. And we're going to have this available for you by the feast, Yahweh willing, so you can display it as a sign, a badge of honor before Yahweh that you are practicing His righteousness. Don't let anyone deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous. That's what Yahweh Himself is saying to you. If you're practicing it, you're at His house. That's one of the first things you got to do. Go to His house where He chooses to place His name, and there, from the mouth of the teachers, Daniel said in Daniel 12, you who are teachers at this time, right now, he's talking about this generation, you're going to shine as the stars of heaven in power and glory and so forth. Now that we were in that, let's go back to Isaiah 66 here. Isaiah 66, and look at verse 19. And I will set a sign, this is the sign that you're practicing righteousness now, that's the sign, among them, Isaiah 66, page 572. Isaiah 66, page 572. Got it? Okay. I will set a sign among them, and those among them who escape, that is, like Revelations 18 says, who come out from among them and be separate from them, I will send to the war-raging nations. What are you doing right now? Every day we're going to the war-raging nations. And Yahweh made it possible with the increase in knowledge for this generation. Daniel 12. And knowledge will be increased. No, we didn't have television sets when I was born. No, they didn't come along till I was about 11 years old. I think it was in the 40s, somewhere in the 40s. And I remember, watching a television set at my brother-in-law's house in 1949, I believe. It might have been later than that, but I think it was about 1949. No, when I was born, we were still traveling in horses and wagons and things like that, fighting wars in horses and wagons. They didn't have nuclear bombs. They didn't have the planes to carry them. But Daniel said, I will increase knowledge. Knowledge will be increased. And from that, the sun will be darkened. From that increase in knowledge, the sun will be darkened. Okay, now we're in Isaiah setting this sign. Now look at verse 21. Verse 21. And I will also take of them for priest. You see that? I will take of those who escape, those who come out from among them. I will take of them for priest. That is teachers. Where do you go to? Mouth of the priest. The mouth. See? The law's at his mouth. They are to teach you from their mouth. Yahweh made that possible by creating the human body like his own. He can actually talk to you mouth to mouth. Yahweh can. And that same human body, that same body, he can enjoy living like you do. Yes, Yahweh can. That's what he's doing, enjoying life to the fullest. You will too by making it into this purple. Yes. Okay, now he will take of them for priests and for Levites, says Yahweh, for as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, will remain before me, the gates of hell will not prevail against them, says Yahweh, so will your seed. Your seed, you remember that? Isaiah said it, your seed. Talking about the two witnesses, they will grow up like willows from the water's courses. Did you get that? The green shows growing. It actually shows growing. The gold shows purification in this growth. The growth that this is talking about is not growing bigger, taller, and muscles and so forth. It's talking about brain strength, growing in the strength of Yahweh. The strength of Yahweh can actually change the hearts and minds. Show me a muscle that can do that. Show me a gun that can do that. Show me any force. You just can't change. You can't change it. You might make him tolerate your evil, Mr. Pope, but you won't make him agree with it. Yahweh's laws from the mouth of Yahweh's priest actually brings one's heart in unity with Yahweh himself. And he wants righteousness. Okay, and your seed will remain. So will your seed, speaking of the seed of the two witnesses, Isaiah 44, 1 through 3. You ought to have that memorized. The seed of the two witnesses. They'll grow up like willows from the water's courses. They'll grow. Green represents that. It represents that growth. Till you get fit, or purple, royal for the royal family, the family of priests. I'll make you a kingdom of priests, Yahweh said. The ones that came out of Israel didn't do that. No, he didn't make that kingdom of priests there, but he brought forth the seed, which is Yahshua. He made him the chief priest over the kingdom of priests that he said he would make. If you will keep all these laws, if you will practice, remember, he who is recognized as righteous is those who practice righteousness. That's the purple ones he's choosing. Those who practice righteousness, as you have. You remember the stages we went through, the stupidity we came out of first when our blood was pink and dying, when the red corpuscles were pink instead of red, when you were dying, eating the wrong kinds of food, practicing wrong habits, and then you started greening up, growing like willows from the water's courses at Yahweh's house. Then you went through the purification stage when the law tried to punish us. Everybody on earth hated us worse than any man has ever been hated. Yes, even the law enforcement said that. They said there ain't no way this man could get a fair trial here in the state of Texas even. And we proved it with their own authorities. In court we proved it, in their own courts. This is where this prophecy came true. But this was a test for you to see if you would run like scared dogs, or you'd stay and say, no, whatever Yahweh wills, I'm ready to take. And you did it. Praise Yahweh. Well, Yahweh said in other places too, he says, your seed and your seed's seed will remain before me, he says. Speaking of the two witnesses, your seed and your name remain. And it will come to pass that from one new moon to another, this is what the Pope did away with, the new moon celebrations. You see that? Are you reading with me? And it will come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh will come and worship before me, says Yahweh. So this is going to go on throughout all eternity. Don't let anyone stop you. Don't let them condemn you. He who practices righteousness. 1 John 3:4 says, he who transgresses these laws, he who don't keep these feasts, he who don't keep the Sabbath day, the weekly Sabbath day, will not make it. No, there'll be gashes under the bottoms of your feet. Well, the Pope says, don't keep the Sabbath. Don't keep your women holy. Let them abuse themselves. Let others abuse these women. Let them abuse you. Let them abuse your children. Yes. Teach them sodomy in all their schools, and let the Supreme Court back up the words of the Vatican. Well, that's what's going on. We're the only ones on the face of the earth, brethren, that's practicing righteousness at Yahweh's house. Now, and they will go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men who have transgressed. That's what sin is, the transgression of Yahweh's laws, remember? 1 John 3:4. You're going to go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men who have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, nor shall their fire be quenched, and they will be an abhorrence to all flesh, all living flesh. Okay, that was verse 21, I believe. Verse 21. Now, verse 23, I'm sorry. Now, back to well, I quoted it, so that's enough. I want you to go now to back to Colossians here, and 2 and verse 16. 2 and verse 16. Colossians, found on page 926. You're supposed to have held your finger in it. 926. Colossians 2:16. Therefore, let no man condemn you for doing these things, eating and drinking in the observance of a feast day, or the new moon, or the Sabbath day, which is a shadow. Now, the King James Version says a shadow of things to come. But if you look over to that center reference there, you will see that the authorities, now if you don't believe in using a dictionary to find out what a word means, then I can't help you. But the authorities say this word here should be from instead of of. And you see what a difference that makes there? The King James says, which is a shadow from, of things to come. But it's a shadow from these things. What are these things? Yeshua said diseases, nuclear war, the worst time of trouble ever. The earth will be destroyed. They'll all be destroyed, consumed together. You just got through reading it in Isaiah 66:17. All of those people who transgress my laws will be consumed together, says Yahweh. Well, verse 17, which are a shadow from these things to come, for the body of Messiah. The body of Messiah, that's our high priest and king over the house of Yahweh. High priest and king. Let no man deprive you of your reward. Your reward is purple, my friends. You've been selected. Yahweh showed it to you in the clouds. Yes. How could you get any more closer to Yahweh than Him talking directly to you this way? Doing it on purpose, but as though in humility. Oh yes, the Pope comes across that way. I don't want any war, but we got to stop them. And it's justified if all nations just gang up on these people and start wiping them out. We got to wipe them out. We got to get rid of them. Revenge is what we want. We got to wipe out the police forces here in America because they killed a boy. revenge. The blood is saying revenge. No, that's coming from your mouth, not the blood. The blood is saying there's death. There's death, there's murder, there's sin. We need to change now. Doing it on purpose, and he's doing it on purpose, with humility of mind. Yes, great psychology he uses, through a religious worship of gods. Yes, that's exactly what he's doing. And that's what they did, and Daniel shows it in chapter 7, where they got rid of the feast days and Sabbath days, intruding into things that they do not know nor understand, being puffed up in their own carnal minds, and not holding firmly to the head, from whom the body is nourished and united as joints and ligaments united. Unity is what is going to get you into the kingdom. Now, this is in Colossians, so don't let anyone deprive you of this. Look on down to verse 23. Indeed, such things are wordy show, self-wisdom, God worship, worship of Elohim, and self-humility, not in any honor of the body, that is the body of Messiah, but only for the gratification of the flesh. Now, with that, all of that in mind that I've just brought, turn on over to Hebrews now. Hebrews 10, because here is the Savior speaking. The Savior, Hebrews 10, and this is found on page 949, Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, look first to verse 16. This is the same covenant. This is the covenant that I will renew with them after those days, says Yahweh. I will put my laws in their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. Now, to do that, they've got to be taught the laws of Yahweh at his house, as Malachi says, at the mouth of the priest, in order to put this into your minds and hearts. The only reason it's here right now in your minds and hearts, the only reason you're here is because Yahweh is guiding and teaching you these things. After those days, I will my laws in their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. Now look on down to see who this is. Verse 21. And having a high priest over the house of Yahweh, this is the highest teacher, the highest judge. He's the high priest over the house of Yahweh. He is your high priest judging you, saying right now, writing to you in the clouds, you're purple, you're purple, you made it, you've got it, just hang in there. Now look on to verse 24, and let us consider one another, how we may urge one another on to righteous works. Is that not what you've been doing all this time? I've been saying, tolerate, yes, help, be a servant. That's the way to make it into unity, and that's the way that no one can fight back. Not forsaking the gathering of yourselves together. This was at the Sabbath day. It's talking about keeping a law here or breaking a law. It's not talking about just gathering out here in the woods somewhere or gathering in graveyards. Did you notice the trips that the Pope is making where he stops and prays? It's the graveyards. Yes, I got it right here. I don't have time to read it to you, but I got it there. Not forsaking the gathering of yourselves together at the house of Yahweh. Go to the place where I choose to establish my name. Don't forsake this gathering of yourselves together, as the manner of some is, not believing, as chapter 4 said, not keeping the Sabbath, as chapter 4 said, but exhorting, verse 25, exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. The day, well, you're seeing it. We got World War III. We got 42 wars raging now. And it's getting worse. And everybody is saying, don't mess with me. I've got nuclear bombs that will reach you, which means we're going to get first strike. And others saying, we better prepare right now to get first strike, because those people are going to hit us if we don't. Well, all of this information is going to the Vatican, and they're saying, what do we do now? And they're looking to the Vatican for help. And the Vatican is saying, well, we need to resurrect the Roman Empire. That's the way to do it. And that's where the nuclear wars, of course, as Malachi Martin says, is going to come. So much the more as you see the day approaching. Well, surely anyone can see the day approaching now just from the news. For if we sin willfully, notice, not forsaking the gathering of yourselves together is a sin. Sin is the breaking of Yahweh's law. So it's talking about a Sabbath day, gathering together on the Sabbath day. And if we break this not gathering together on the Sabbath day, if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains the sacrifice for sins. If you turn back, brethren, then this is what it's talking about. Don't look back. Set your hand to the plow and don't look back. You only got a few days to go. What do you have out there if you go out there? Another car to pay for? Another rat race to get in? Like a dog chasing his own tail? What will it accomplish you? It'll be wore out, burned out before you could even get your... You know, I liked this last week when they showed the news. No, it's on the women's side. And one of them was talking about the cost of education, $245,000 now to get your child through college, where they can teach you to work at McDonald's or, put a hamburger together. My mother could have taught you that in 5 minutes, but you got to go to college for 4 years to learn it now. Get a degree, and then they'll tell you, well, we don't have a job for you. You know, there's no jobs right now in that field. Well, what do? Well, McDonald's hiring. But if you sin willfully, there remains no more sacrifice for sin, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fury indignation, which will devour the adversary. Yes, that's what we was talking about, Isaiah 66. They'll be devoured together. They'll be consumed together. It's on the downside now, brethren. We still got the worst wars, but we know that Yahweh is protecting us at the protected place. He got you through this far, didn't he? They didn't kill you yet. They killed others that didn't have Yahweh's protection. They will more. They're going to kill everyone that's practicing any kind of holiness, and they won't have Yahweh's protection like you do. You have Yahweh's protection here at His house. If you don't stop keeping His commandments, if you hold tight to what you've been taught here, you have Yahweh's full protection. And now you have His recognition of purple being painted to you in the sky. Oh, what I was going to tell you I've got to finish telling you this. The person goes to school, they build up this big debt, you know, and this was a woman. She worked all of her life, and just as she was just about ready to die, gray-headed, slumped over like this, you know, and barely walk. Well, they come to her door, bringing her, saying, "You just finished paying the last debt of your college tuition. Finally got it paid off." There's another one that talks about slumping, that a prophecy, I don't know if you've ever noticed it or not, but Yahweh said, I would slump. He said that. And if I turn sideways, you could see how my shoulders are bent, because I've been slumping, not too much. I'm going to do it till Yahweh gives me my new body. It's a little bit painful sometimes, but I don't want to quit writing. But I didn't know I didn't know that Yahweh was talking about that when he mentioned that. You know, I never know till last week, and somebody said, I read something about an old Jewish rabbi that was translating the scriptures, and they described him as his shoulders being slumped, overly slumped from too much bending over his table writing. And I said, well, that scripture is talking about me. You know where that scripture is found? Genesis 49. I'm not going to tell you any more about it. Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the service back to the next leader. I love you.